The morning Marcus Webb drove out to look at the property, the sky was the color of old dishwater. Gray and low and still. He had written the address on a torn piece of receipt paper, and it sat now on the passenger seat of his truck, slightly crumpled, like it wasn't sure it wanted to be there. He almost turned around twice. The first time was when the GPS took him off the main road and down a street lined with chain-link fences and broken gutters. The second time was when he finally saw it, the garage on Elm Street. It sat at the far end of a gravel lot, half hidden behind an overgrown hedge of wild blackberry bushes. The paint on the walls had long since given up. The sliding door was warped at the bottom, where years of rain had pushed the wood into a slow, downward curl. A rusted weather vane on the roof pointed nowhere in particular. Marcus sat in his truck for a long moment and just looked at it. He was 34 years old. He had spent the last 8 of those years working in the logistics department of a shipping company, sitting in the same corner cubicle, under the same flickering fluorescent light, managing routes for other people's goods. It was steady work, respectable work, and it had quietly hollowed him out, the way water wears a stone, not all at once, but slowly, over time, until one day you notice the center is gone. He climbed out of the truck. The gravel crunched under his boots as he walked toward the garage. A sparrow shot out from somewhere in the bushes and disappeared into the gray sky. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and old motor oil, the kind of smell that settles into a place and decides to stay. The garage had been listed on a property liquidation site. The seller was a man named Richard Calloway, the CEO of a mid-sized furniture company that had recently restructured, which was a polite way of saying it had shed anything that wasn't profitable. The garage had been used briefly as overflow storage. Now it was just a liability, sitting on a lot the company no longer needed. The listing price was $1,000. Marcus had called Richard Calloway's office expecting to be redirected to a secretary or a legal department. Instead, Calloway himself had picked up on the third ring, and his voice had been cheerful in the way of someone who has already forgotten something and is glad to be reminded. "That old thing," Calloway had said. "Sure, come take a look. Honestly, I'm just happy to get it off the books. It's junk, but if you want it, it's yours." Junk. Marcus ran his hand along the side wall of the garage now, feeling the rough, peeling wood beneath his palm. He pressed gently, testing for rot. The wall held. He walked the perimeter slowly, measuring with his eyes, counting paces. The footprint was larger than it looked from the front, deep and wide, with a side door and a small window that let in a pale, watery light. He stood in the center of the empty space and looked up at the ceiling. The rafters were solid, a little dusty, yes, a little cobwebbed at the corners, but solid. Something loosened in his chest. Just slightly, just enough. He bought it the following week. The first month, Marcus spent mostly cleaning. He filled 6 dumpsters with decades of accumulated debris, broken shelves, rusted tools, stacks of molded cardboard, a chair with no seat. He repaired the sliding door. He patched a section of the roof where a branch had cracked 2 shingles in some forgotten storm. He repainted the exterior walls a deep, quiet green, the color of pine needles after rain. He did most of it on evenings and weekends, after his regular job. He came home with paint on his forearms and sawdust in his hair and slept better than he had in years. By the second month, he had installed workbenches along 3 walls. He brought in tools he had collected over the years from estate sales and pawn shops, a good table saw, 2 drill presses, a lathe he had restored himself from near ruin. He strung up warm overhead lights that turned the space amber in the evenings. He had been building things since he was a boy. Small things, mostly, wooden boxes, shelving units, little carved figures he gave away as gifts. His father had taught him the basics in a garage not so different from this one. But somewhere in the business of becoming an adult, the building had gotten pushed into corners and closets and eventually into just memory. Now it had room again. By the 3rd month, a neighbor noticed the light on late at night and knocked on the side door. Her name was Diane, and she asked if he made furniture. Her dining table had a broken leg, she said, and she couldn't find anyone to fix it properly. Marcus looked at the table and fixed it in an afternoon. She told her sister. Her sister told a friend. Marcus built a simple website in an evening. He photographed the workbenches, the tools, the green exterior walls catching morning light, He called the business Webb and Company. Woodcraft. By the 4th month, he had a waiting list. By the 5th, he had hired his first helper, a quiet young man named Terrence who had dropped out of a design program and had hands that seemed to understand wood instinctively. By the 6th month, Marcus sat down one Sunday evening with a ledger and a cup of coffee and went through the numbers carefully, the way he had learned to do in those 8 years of logistics work, all those spreadsheets finally finding a purpose he could feel. The revenue was real. The growth was steady. The waiting list had stretched to 4 months. He thought about calling Richard Calloway. Not to gloat. That had never been his way. Just to say thank you, maybe. Because the man had called this place junk, and in doing so, had made it available. And sometimes the things other people have given up on are exactly the things that are waiting for someone willing to look at them differently. He didn't make the call. He poured a second cup of coffee and sat in the open doorway of the garage, listening to the neighborhood settle into evening. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The sparrows were back in the blackberry bushes, rustling and invisible. The weather vane on the roof had been fixed now. It turned slowly in the evening breeze, pointing south. Marcus Webb looked at what he had made and felt, for the first time in a long time, like himself.